Here is a quote that's interesting from this book. Some interesting things about it. Our Independence and the Constitution, good book, I recommend it. Kids book, but one of the landmark books written by Dorothy Canfield Fisher. Illustrated by Roger Dormus. Random House, New York, landmark book. Like there. A lot of different things in this series. It's got a bunch of them, books for kids. One about the Wright brothers is good, really good. But in this one, got a good quote, a good section in there I like a lot. So this is at the end of the book. At the beginning, there's some young kids and they're witnessing things in American history. And then I think this part is later in the book when a girl has become a grandmother and she's way older. Instead of like 6, she's like 76 or something. But, and okay, yeah, I got some notes here. It's from 1775 to 1787 with a postscript set in 1840, 1841. So 25, 65 years. Yeah. So if she was 6 and then 65 years later, okay, maybe 71, not 76, but close enough. It's told from the perspective of a family, a husband, a wife, 2 boys, and 1 girl named Debby, and they live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And this is from page 179 to 180 of my edition. There'll be some quotes and some subquotes in this. I'll do an initial quote, and then I guess I'll quote stuff in there to make it clear of who's saying what and all that. But so I'll do initial quote to start, final quote to finish. Now I'll just say quote in there when I'm quoting someone. Okay, initial quote. Drawing a long breath of relief, Debby looked up. To her surprise, 4 of her grandchildren stood there, rosy and smiling, their coats and caps still on, their skates hanging on their shoulders. Debby's ears, as well as her eyes, were now rather dulled by her age. She had not heard them come into the house, as they often did after school or play, hoping for apples or cookies. They laughed out now to see her look astonished that they were there. Quote, "We just clumped up the stairs," unquote, they said. Quote, "But you were so deep in your reading, you never heard a sound. We've been standing here watching you, almost ready to cry 1 minute by your looks, and then ready to give 3 cheers. That must be an exciting story," unquote. One of them leaned over her shoulder and read out the title. Quote, "Debates of the Constitutional Convention in 1787, as set down by Mr. James Madison," unquote. The youngsters broke into groans. Quote, "Oh, Granny, how can you read such a dull book?" unquote. At this, to their great surprise, their grandmother broke into a merry, ringing laugh, as if they had said something funny. Such a young laugh. They had never heard their grandmother laugh so like a girl. They liked her, all right. She was always good to them, especially when one of them was sick. But she had seemed to them a very serious-minded old lady, working hard in the local society for the abolition of slavery, always doing something for the public schools of town, always reading the accounts of the political goings-on in Washington instead of the fashion notes. They were not used to seeing her enjoy a joke so heartily. And what was the joke? She pulled off her reading spectacles to see them more clearly. Her eyes were still crinkled at the corners from her laugh. Quote, dull, unquote, she said, and laughed again. Quote, it's only dull to ignorant people. It's the most exciting book I've ever read in all my life, unquote, end quote. Awesome. So true. That is how people should be taught abstractions. That is, oh, the kids are young in this case, so it makes sense. They're like 6, but, or whatever. But for people not to find some things in philosophy and physics and history exciting and thrilling is a systemic failure on the part of education and the culture. Of course, not for every individual person. This should be done. We don't have to like everything, but we should appreciate the importance of it. We don't all have the same interests and capacities and powers and strengths and weaknesses, but we should appreciate things like this and know how there's all these fundamental, deep, exciting things out there in life to discover. That is how it should be for different things. So that's one thing, as I say, it's like awesome. Something like that is not dull. It's the ignorant person who is dull. And as adults and parents and teachers, we have a responsibility to instill good interpretations of things in our students and not train them with their own biases or failures or whatever. That's not responsible. Not something we should do. We should resist the temptation to claim things are boring when it's just something we might not understand or be interested in. And if you're making that mistake, then change. Everyone makes mistakes. We all got to learn. But the point is not to do it. To those out there who are helping the youth do better like that, thank you. But when we look at some things, people make a mistake of thinking what they think is the way the world is. They tell the world as if the world revolves around them. No. We revolve around the world. It is the center. We got to bow down. It doesn't bow down to us. It tells us the way things are. We don't tell it. It's a basic principle we need to get. And you're going to find people do that too much, like to you and to others. They try to tell other people the way they are instead of asking and digging into the world. People lie and they can misrepresent. We've got to consider that. But we do it by looking at the way things are, not by telling the person that they are a certain way. It's a different principle we're talking about here. We're talking about fundamental, universal, all things, not just because some people lie. So in a lot of cases, not just because we know some people lie, some people try to tell other people the way they are. You're like this, you're like that, and you'll notice it in your experience, especially if you start to pay more attention. Sometimes you might miss it because you just get angry that someone's doing something. You don't see it as a general principle or connect it with others. Because we're social animals, we focus on this one thing and then move on to another sometimes. But if you start to pay attention to the principle and what's going on, then whoa, it's like common, too common. I see that. But here, when things are boring, it's a relationship between someone in the world. It could be the thing. Some things can be boring, like pretty much everyone. Maybe someone finds it interesting, but maybe something is boring where it's the person themselves, the assessor who is boring, not the thing. Something can be boring because, as she says there really well, it's to the ignorant, to those who don't know and don't appreciate it. It's not an insult. It's just a statement of this kind of person. Here's the cause-effect relationship. This is a class of thing that can have that cause-effect relationship and think it's boring. This kind of person, this thing, the relationship that they think it's boring, it's because of the person not knowing. That's like the cause of this stuff. It's not in the thing itself. It's in the person being ignorant. Sometimes some people are just boring. They find everything boring because they're boring and their curiosities have been stamped out and they're frustrated and all this stuff. And that's pretty sad. But it's in them, not the thing. Where there's a problem. They need to learn to be more interested in the world and to realize there are things beyond them, things they're going to need to know in the future and all that. Or you don't know enough about a subject because of ignorance. People need to know more about something to find it interesting. It's like, duh. If you don't know anything about there, what is the relationship between you and the world and that thing? Like, why would you care? We're not going to get that until we learn more about it. Then it's like, whoa, light bulb, I get it now. It is important. And that's part of the issue too. And yeah, some people, when they present something, the way they talk, their knowledge of a subject, the interest they portray, boring. Some people are not good lecturers, monotone, robotic, don't bring anything interesting in there. So boring could be the person who's presenting it, it's boring, not the subject itself. Sometimes there might be a subject that's boring for a lot of people. Sometimes it's the person who claims something is boring. They're the ones who are boring. No curiosity, no drive, no interest in the world. Or as I say, a lot of times it's just not knowing enough. So there's like some different things that come up when someone thinks something's boring. It's actually when you understand, when you see the depth of the importance of this, it matters. But it's got to be portrayed by teachers and adults. Why are some things important? A lot of people think geometry, this is boring, why it's important? Wrong. For one thing, it's so cool to do the proofs. Who can not think that's cool? But of course, not everyone does. We got to know better. People are doing different interests and all that. But it should be discussed how Abraham Lincoln studied, for example, Abraham Lincoln studied geometry in his 40s. He memorized it in his 40s when he was an adult to make himself a better thinker. So he could do law better. Because he wasn't doing as well as he wanted. He wanted to know, what is it to demonstrate something? He was at that point where he could think about it. When he was 15, no. What 15-year-old has experience in a court of law? None. Maybe one or two, but very few. Highly unusual, genius little kids that have memorized law, but not very often because it takes a lot of memorization of law, understanding of it. That's like a higher level abstraction that kids are not going to get. They can memorize math. You can learn violin, but to understand the human condition, evil and good, the different factors that can make a lessen a crime or make it more serious, things you got to consider in judging someone. It takes a lot of experience in life. It takes a lot of study of law. So this can be when someone's older. There are geniuses in math when they're young. There are no philosophic geniuses when they're young for a reason, because much more abstract, takes much more life experience. But it's not just like a skill on a violin. Takes more thought, not just some feeling. Remember I said not just, it takes feeling and values also, obviously. But we need to bring up like Abraham Lincoln and show how he learned Euclid's elements in his 40s, because it made him a better thinker. And that made our country the way it is. Without that, he could not have won debates against Douglas, gotten into the Senate, gotten into the presidency, wrote great speeches, some of the greatest political speeches in history, and made good decisions, been able to deal with people well. He was known as a good thinker before because of the study of geometry and other things, but after studying geometry in his 40s, it's in the biographical record, he was much sharper. I have a book right here holding up a phone, so I can't pick it up, but Abraham Lincoln and the Structure of Reason. That's one place where it's really delved into a lot, but in other biographies and histories and things, people know that Lincoln studied geometry. But then we got some important reason to study it, so we can be like Lincoln on our own. It's got real content. It's not boring. It's only boring to ignorant people. Geometry has influenced Galileo and Newton and made our lives better. This computer, this cell phone, this stuff we would not have without the influence of geometry in science and thinking in life. And if you like listening to music, then you better appreciate geometry, because it ain't boring, it's life-giving. But there are some things to consider there. The importance of fighting for values and for freedom, for example, in history, that should be really brought to life. What some of the founding fathers made possible, even though they made some mistakes, unfortunately, but they did some good things that were corrected with Abraham Lincoln. They made some mistakes. There was a great price paid in the Civil War for that mistake. And people had to fight, take care of it, correct the mistake, and get things more consistent with individual rights. But that the importance of geometry, they have, when you bring it back down to reality in human life and stories and wisdom, then it makes more sense that it is doing something out of nowhere and not telling people why. Just because we might know something doesn't mean students know. It's not going to give them motivation. Let them know why. Why, as a human, is this important? What's the drama? What's the value? What's the survival value? What's the emotional impact? That should be brought up. So there are some things we can learn from this awesome little scene in the book. As she says, as they say, quote, "She pulled off her reading spectacles to see them more clearly. Her eyes were still crinkled at the corners from her laugh. Dull," she said, and laughed again. "It's only dull to ignorant people. It's the most exciting book I've ever read in all my life." Unquote. Amen. That's something we should do as teachers, parents, people, ideas in our own mind, things we're teaching the young. Make it exciting, and all we got to do is look for it, because we don't got to make it up, because it's already there. Dig into reality, please. Find out where it's exciting. Be real about things. And then you can be real and talk the truth. You're not going to make things up to make things exciting. It doesn't got to be little play games. Look at history. Look at real human people. Students will get excited by that. Peace.